Now that we've spoken about changing different types of things like fractions, percentages, and decimals, we are going to look at since this topic is percentages, we are going to look further at the operations with percentages and some of the applications of this. So, the first one of these is going to be an easier one that I'll start us off with because just by the name, this should be relatively familiar to you if you've done year 7 fractions. Now, if you haven't, I have a few videos in my year 7 fractions playlist, but the title of this topic is percentages of a quantity. Now, this of a quantity bit, you may remember from fractions of a quantity. And this often involved taking the fraction of some whole number, of some quantity. So, wait a minute though, aren't percentages just types of fractions? They're just numbers as a fraction of 100. So, couldn't we then just use what we know from fractions of a quantity and just apply this to operations with percentages? Now let's have a look. Now, let's start with this example. I'm going to ask you, let's find 10% of 300. So, already we should be looking at this word of, because what does that really mean? Well, in the context of this, we are looking essentially at 10% lots of 300. When we look at whole numbers, if I were to tell you 2 lots of 4, well, you would tell me that that's just 4 added to 4, which gives me 8. Or an easier way would be 2 multiplied by 4. And we kind of do the same thing when we work with fractions or percentages of a quantity. We are just saying, well, what's a fraction lots of our whole number? So here, our 10%, how can we write this as a fraction? Well, we can say that expressing this, we just need to express this as a fraction of 100. And here, we want 10 hundredths lots of 300. Now, you may remember from my fractions of a quantity video that when we do this, well, we are multiplying the numerator by our 300, because this is the same as writing 300 over 1, because any number divided by 1 as a fraction of 1 is just itself. And when we multiply fractions, I've shown the proof for this in that video series, so feel free to go back and look at that. So I won't spend too much time on it. But we just multiply our numerators and leave them on the numerator and multiply our denominators. So that's like saying 10 multiplied by 300 divided by 100, lots of 1. And I'll be left with 3,000 on the top and 100. And 3,000 divided by 100 will give us 30, because our zeros here will cancel out. So that's like saying this is an equivalent fraction of 30 over 1. And 30 divided by 1 just gives us 30. Now let's do one more example. Let's find 2.5%. So that's example 2. 2.5%. Oh, that looks a bit confusing because I've put that dot there. Okay, hopefully that makes more sense. 2.5% of 36. Okay, well, let's write this percentage as a fraction because we saw that that was useful to us to compute these things. So we have 2.5 over 100 multiplied by 36. So here, once again, all we're doing is we're working with our numerators first, finding the product of those, and multiplying our denominator by just this little ghost denominator of 1 on my right-hand side. So let's write a couple more lines of working here. That is like saying 2.5 multiplied by 36 on top of 100. And taking those two on the numerator, I get 90 over 100. Now, we can here, well, we're not going to get a whole number, are we? Because this thing here is a fraction. Before, we had a really big quantity of 300. So we ended up simplifying that to just some number over 1. But now here we have 90 over 100. And let's leave this as a fraction, but simplify it a little bit. Now, there is a factor of 10 in both numerator and denominator. So I can divide the top by 10 and the bottom by 10 to give me a smaller equivalent fraction, to give me this fraction in its simplest form. And I'll be left with 9/10. So that is how we find the percentage of a quantity. And as you may have gathered, this is exactly the same as taking fractions of quantities, because percentages are types of fractions. They're just a different way of representing fractions. See you guys next time.